As we missed Charlie last week, he's back in the saddle, and so are we here live in Washington. Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg Radio, satellite radio channel 121. And how about this? Have you found us on YouTube TV? I always tell you to watch us on YouTube, and you can search Bloomberg Business News Live. But if you have YouTube TV, you can watch this program on Bloomberg Originals. You can watch Bloomberg TV itself, the mother channel, anytime you want. It's being piped into your house now. Just want to make sure you know that. It's a recent addition. And, of course, you got the podcast where you can always find us, curated daily by America's producer James. Side by side today with Michelle Jamrisco in Washington as we try to find truth at the beginning of a long week here in the Capitol. It's going to get longer as we get into tomorrow. Imagine the compartmentalizing, as I said earlier. The split screen in Washington will be on one side, House Republicans voting en masse, well, now that they've been told by the president to vote for the release of the Epstein files. That's tomorrow, right as MBS rolls into D.C. for a full-blown state visit at the White House. I haven't figured out if Venezuela is going to be part of the day tomorrow, but it's going to be a pretty busy one around here with much more to discuss. The airlines are getting back to normal, Michelle. Transportation Department and the FAA late last night say they're lifting cuts across the 40 major airports where they had been clipping capacity. Starting 6 a.m. today, on Friday, they eased up on flight restrictions to about 3%. So this should feel a little bit more like normal, suggesting you'll only be delayed by hours instead of days.
Yeah.
Is that about right?
This is where we start.
It's not like the airport was great before this started.
Yeah, and it'll be a real test next week when we get into the holiday travel, particularly around Thanksgiving, to see if things are all patched
You're
up
flying
from shutdown
Thanksgiving
messes.
weekend, right?
Yeah,
you nervous?
A little bit.
I wouldn't go
as
near
always.
the airport myself. So then you start considering the government shutdown and whether we're going to be in for another one in January, because it's time to negotiate health care.
Yeah, we just restarted the clock again, right? So the countdown is real, and there's a lot to get done before that. So
whether it's an extension of Obamacare subsidies or a whole new product is kind of the big question right now. Remember, President Trump said he wants to just give money directly to people. Of course, they'd still have to give that money to the insurance company. So he was asked about this flying around over the weekend on his way back to Washington, D.C. Here's President Trump outside the plane.
We're negotiating with lawmakers, and I've had personal talks with some Democrats. I can't tell you who they are. I just don't want to do that. It's not fair to them, about paying large amounts of dollars back to the people.
Back to the people so they could, I guess, give it to the insurance company. You still need an insurance company here, right?
Yeah, I mean, who knows how they're going to try to set this up or
under the table with your doctor, maybe?
I think we still need, I think there's still a role for them to play. I think it's safe to say.
Safe to say. Nathan Dean is with us right now. Straight from Bloomberg Intelligence, the senior U.S. policy analyst. Nice to see you, sir. Did you guys win the football game?
We beat the Vikings yesterday.
You did?
Right.
All right.
Go
Kids
Bears.
are happy? The Dean household is happy.
My son's a Vikings fan. He was upset. He rage quit, but the rest of us are happy.
Gosh, very good. I don't know what to make of this. Are we really going to open this can of worms right now? And what kind of calls are you getting when it comes to people who own shares of these health insurers? Because everybody's nervous about what comes next.
So obviously we're going to have a vote in December. And this vote, my colleague Dwayne Wright put out a note, and he used words like long odds, skeptical.
Oh, boy.
Look, you're not going to be able to figure out, to come together on a comprehensive health care solution within 15 legislative days when they've been trying for years. The Republicans have been trying for years to figure out an alternative to Obamacare. Yeah. And let's also not forget that if the ACA subsidies go away, the Democrats then have a message for 2026. And so I think this is one of those things where they're going to go through the motions, they're going to have a vote, and at the end of the day, even if this passes the Senate, and that's a big if, it goes to the House where Speaker Johnson has not put a guarantee that he would have a vote. And so I think this just gets kicked into 2026 politics. But again, Dwayne doesn't really see a deal coming together.
Well, Nathan, if we zoom out for just a second, I mean, we're just past the shutdown. There's a lot of messes to be cleaned up. We're talking about the FAA finally getting flights back in order. I mean, what else, if you're Mike Johnson, how do you triage triage this? Like, what else is the top priority? We still got appropriations bills, arguably, that are at the center of this, right? What else do you have to make sure you're not distracted by Epstein and other things that might get in the way of the congressional business? How is he, do you think, thinking about the agenda for this month to come?
So I think there's a couple of things that are going to be working that he can sort of deflect away from Epstein to say that we're going to work. First is the appropriations work. We have 9 out of the 12 bills that still have to go through appropriations. Knock on wood, we'll see some momentum on that. But we also have the crypto story. Senate Banking and the Senate Ag Committee are doing some work right now. And obviously the House Clarity Act is already passed, so the House doesn't really have much of an effort to play at the moment. They're waiting for the Senate here. But, for the long story short is that the House doesn't actually have all that much to do. Because now that the One Big Beautiful Bill is passed and we don't see another reconciliation bill, there's not much we're anticipating from the House all the way up through the 2026 midterm elections. Wow. And so this is one of those challenges for Speaker Johnson is how is he going to keep his members busy when you're not anticipating a lot of legislation coming out? So I think it's going to be a lot of hearings and it's going to be a lot of, saying we're going to work on stuff. But again, you hit it right on the head. Speaker Johnson has an issue on his hands because we're not anticipating that much.
Boy, just to be clear, on the healthcare subsidies, do you see subsidies being extended as more likely than a new system being crafted, or nothing happens before the end of the year?
I think status quo plays out.
Okay.
The status quo is meaning that the ACA subsidies goes away, and Dwayne's note essentially said, look, you are going to see debate over this. You are going to see efforts over this. And look, the Republicans have to do something because neither party, obviously, I think most people do not want these subsidies to go up in terms of the political messaging for 2026. But it's going to be a challenge for Speaker Johnson to support any deal that comes out of the Senate. And Dwayne's whole point here is that, the Democrats also have a message that if nothing gets done, the Democrats can go out there and say, look, we tried, we had this fight over it, and now it's the GOP's problem, and they have to own it throughout the 2026.
The polling is tough on this. We saw these new numbers today. Plymouth Union Public Advocacy, which is a conservative nonprofit, they looked at 2 states, Maine and Alaska, where you've got contests here. If Susan Collins votes to extend the credits, she gains a net 6 points in her campaign. In Alaska, 43% undecided voters say they were more likely to back Dan Sullivan, senator from Alaska, if he extends the credits. 48% less likely if he allows them to expire. Republicans know this.
Yeah, absolutely. But they also know that with tariffs as well. Tariffs are extremely unpopular, but this is a situation where, I think in order to get this done, Speaker Johnson would have to violate some form of the Hastert rule where, the majority members of your caucus may be against this. Do you bring something to the floor here? And so Speaker Johnson has to make this calculus. Am I going to do something that helps individuals in 2026? Right. Or am I going to try and protect a lot of my caucus here? I don't think we really have an idea, but at the high level, without getting into a lot of the specifics of there, I think ultimately the status quo wins, and that is just the ACA subsidies go away.
Wow.
Well, Nathan, I know we're just out of the record-long government shutdown, but you were so good at handicapping the probabilities of the duration of that one. I'm wondering, what are you seeing in the months to come? Or is there a possibility we're going to go right back into shutdown mode?
So I'm at 30 to 40% right now that there will be a shutdown, meaning that
you got odds already on January.
These are very, 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 very low. But I don't think I think there's 30 to 40% chance of a shutdown right now in January.
Yeah. Wow.
The major caveat is what comes from the White House, and this is I'm looking at rescissions bills here. Because as you both know, it takes 60 votes to put in an appropriations bill. It takes 50 votes to actually rescind money. And that equation just does not work. And so if you see any steps coming from the White House saying, look, I just know that you agreed on a bill, but we're going to try and take steps to actually rescind some of that money. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but that would put the equation of we potentially could see a shutdown in January. But I go back to this idea that next year is an election year, and the Democrats who came out of this shutdown, according to the polling, slightly more favorable than the Republicans. I think the Democrats say here is that, you know what, we had our fight. We kept our, we kept our unification amongst the party base. Our polling was slightly ahead. Let's cash the chips in now while we're ahead. Let's not have a shutdown because it's an election year and it's bad politics.
Boy, all right. This is fascinating to hear. And I'll remind everybody that it was just last summer. You and I sat here and talked about President Trump potentially wanting to reschedule marijuana, cannabis, something that was already underway in the Biden administration. There's been no movement on this. And in fact, quite the opposite. We just saw, as part of this reopening, a continuing resolution that was passed, an excising of hemp legalization that was part of the 2018 Agriculture Improvement Act. This was a Mitch McConnell initiative, if I remember, and it allowed a lot of folks to be creative with uses of intoxicating elements of THC from the hemp plant as opposed to the cannabis plant, if I understand this correctly. So you go to the convenience store, you see all this stuff on the shelf. That's where it was coming from. Now that's illegal. Where's the administration on this whole story?
So I think this really showcases how difficult marijuana investors and the marijuana equities that we always say have hot sauce on it.
Yeah.
This is the difficulty of trying to get additional regulatory relief from the administration. Now, there's two pieces to the hemp argument that are important to note. One is the deal that just came in, the government shutdown, doesn't impact any industrial usage of hemp. So we did have some questions coming in from clients on whether or not this takes away from hemp clothing or hemp manufacturing. Sure. Not so much on the industrial side, but on the consumer side, it's a little bit different. We're talking about an industry that's around $28 billion and employs over 300,000 people across the United States. But by a vote of 76 to 24, the senators said, we're going to close this loophole. Now, what does it mean for marijuana? Well, two things. One, marijuana legalization and even something like the Safer Banking Act, much more difficult, unlikely to happen through 2026, and probably may not even happen until 2028 or even longer because of that generational issue within the Senate. But when it comes to rescheduling, just a few weeks ago, President Trump said, look, I'm okay with this idea, and I'm paraphrasing here because he released a video saying that, maybe the idea of research, maybe the idea of testing and so forth, but it's ultimately going to be the DEA's decision. And Terrence Cole, the administrator of the DEA, is not a fan of marijuana, has spent 30 years of his career combating this. And unless President Trump comes out and says, I want this done, I don't think the DEA is going to do it. The one caveat I would have to it is next year's an election year, and if President Trump decides he needs that support, then we may see a kick of the can and say, let's start this process. That's exactly what I was
going to ask, Nathan, because some of this you're expecting in the second half of 2026. What's the political win for Trump? Just a small base, or do you think significant enough to sway him?
Probably enough.
All right. In the meantime, if it's about hemp, go smoke a rope is the message from Congress. Yep. All right. Nathan Dean, Senior U.S. Policy Analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. I'm Joe Matthew. This is